Hello everyone. In accordance with laws ensuring quintessential parts of culture are not destined to be either appropriated by corporations forever or left to decay, all art subject to copyright is destined to enter what is known as the public domain, and upon entering this realm, these creative intellectual properties become free for anyone to use, even for monetary gain. In most of Western civilization, the average time to elapse before this happens is measured as the author's lifespan plus 70 years. In light of this, thus far many works of fiction have reached the public domain, and one of the most notable among them is Sherlock Holmes, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, reaching the public domain in 2000 in Europe, but 2023 in the US. This culminated in the productions of unrelated iterations of Sherlock Holmes, which only differed from the realm of fanfiction in terms of its commercial legitimacy and professional quality. Otherwise, it frankly has been functionally identical to fanfiction. After all, the writers who accept or pursue gigs to create these Sherlock Holmes stories are likely to be fans of the works.
Yeah, if I can persuade everybody else, I would, of course, I'd revisit it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what can you ever say that you've run out of Sherlock Holmes stories? There are 60 originals, and we've done, what is it, 13 or 14? There's loads more you could do with Sherlock. I'd quite like to revisit it.
The nature of Sherlock Holmes and Watson is episodic by its creation. If Conan Doyle was still around, he'd be writing screenplays, and essentially that's what he did. He did the 19th century version of that, and it was very cinematic and Bond-esque. I always felt his vision. Hence, when it got presented to me, it was a no-brainer for me to get my head around it.
The result of this was a kind of renaissance of Sherlock novels and media, including everything from the BBC's Sherlock starring Benedict Cumberbatch as the titular character, to a series of films directed by Guy Ritchie which saw Robert Downey Jr. playing the role. Beyond that, Mr. Holmes from 2015 graced our screens with Sir Ian McKellen playing an old and retired Sherlock Holmes, grappling with dementia and reconciling that even his mind could one day struggle to solve a case. Amidst this was, of course, courtesy of the public domain, over 20,000 non-canonical Sherlock Holmes stories whose writers, unlike fanfiction, stood to make a living off creating within this fictional universe. With this said, it wasn't as cut and dried as it may seem. The buffer period between Sherlock Holmes entering the public domain for Europe in 2000 and for the US in 2023 made it unclear, since there has always been a lot of industry cross-pollination between Pinewood in the UK and Hollywood studios in the US. Still more, when only certain stories in the Sherlock Holmes catalogue entered the public domain before they were eventually all released in its entirety. Some writers had to finagle and write around certain story elements. Notably, there was a time when characterizing Sherlock Holmes specifically as warm and soft was still restricted by copyright. One can imagine how this grey area made for confusion on what writers were even able to do with this IP, apparently in the public domain. Both Guy Ritchie and the BBC avoided this infringement on copyright respectively. The BBC made him cold, calculated, and emotionally stunted, yet with a comedic air. Guy Ritchie made him more capable in physical fights, harping on his perception and intuition to navigate conspiracies on an epic, stylized, and sometimes explosive scale. Both of these were adhering to the boundaries of not using the warm and soft Sherlock Holmes, except I don't really think the Doyle estate thought about this sufficiently. Because of the mass appeal of Benedict Cumberbatch and Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, the soft and amicable version was utterly buried when it came to popular mass culture. The estate protected this gentle Holmes portrayed in more final and recent copyrighted stories, and because the catalogue of Sherlock Holmes went to the public domain gradually and in order of release, and not all at once, the Sherlock Holmes who was last to reach the public domain became the more trivialized and underutilized, which is why complex grey areas were navigated to bring the 2015 Mr. Holmes into fruition, with the producer paying a settlement fee and agreeing to include an official acknowledgement thanking the Conan Doyle estate for the kind permission. Too much circumventing from potential litigation for production to be worth it. Therefore, because this IP came to the public domain as it was meant to, gradually, it warped the perception of the character and altered how he was understood by the general public, especially members of the public who do not read and prefer visual mediums. Is the public domain a net positive? Regardless of how turbulent the process of public domain tends to be, the entire catalogue of an intellectual property eventually becomes free for all creatives to use. When this occurs, it is akin to the rolling of the dice synonymous with George Lucas selling off Star Wars to Disney, who hire a variety of creatives to continue its legacy.
These are my kids.
Except in the case of the public domain, the intellectual property shifts from being controlled by one person to potentially everybody in the world, or at least everyone who is so inclined to leverage the IP's new status as public domain. This new paradigm shift is preeminently concerning the newly granted ability for anyone to make money by using an IP that is not of their own creation. However, just writing in someone else's world is not the novelty in this instance. Fanfiction, whether you think it's unfairly maligned or amateur noise, has always been a factor in the ethos of stories. Even before copyright for the written word existed, any divergent translation and iterations of ancient tales would have been functionally the same as fanfiction. The world was not always as robust and connected as it is now, in order to establish commerce, law, and a sense of canon to a narrative. But alas, we are in that modern world now. Objectively, the public domain does grant fanfiction more legitimacy in practically all conceivable ways. Subjectively, I believe writing fanfiction is a waste of talent in the long term, because a writer of fanfiction does not own a single word they write, does not own the rights to make a living from them. While it might seem cynical to say, it is unsustainable for a writer to hone their craft or realise previously undiscovered career potential by writing fanfiction. Sure, they can use fanfiction as a vehicle of popularity to leverage when they do come to write original stories. But much of the forethought, research and world building is not being practiced when it is all done for you. Such a skill is required to eventually create your own world building and then write a story in it. I say this to highlight a benefit for the public domain, where this ceases to be an issue. Writers from any walks of life can absolutely indulge, yet even in this redress, the IP becomes extremely saturated with thousands of enthusiasts having the same idea. In order to decide if the public domain is a net positive, my instinct is to examine whether the hierarchy of influence meaningfully reforms. Are the underdog independent writers granted a better chance to rise to the surface, above entities with wealthy production and marketing budgets? Well, I don't think it's been obvious that most of the Sherlock Holmes catalogue has been in the public domain since the year 2000, because of all the well-funded projects which overshadow the rest. To cut to the chase and be bold, I think it's clear the public domain does not create an atmosphere of equality of opportunity. Mostly it just causes multiple large corporations to compete with each other for their adaptations to be considered standard. Such musings might suggest the public domain is a negative, which would be false because it stops lethargic creators hogging franchises with iconic worlds and characters which mean a lot to people, doing nothing with them for years, unless they are merely licensing the IP and therefore incentivized to slop out crap just to maintain the use it or lose it clause in a contract. In essence, thanks to the public domain, parts of culture will always live on, and there will always be potential for someone to give prominence to them. The people, the audience, the readers, the customers who made the art the cultural landmark it had become finally get something back for their investment in perpetuity, an appreciation for their passion, a comforting notion that even if people are not inclined to create, they influence the future by choosing to support a certain creation and, if they so desire, if they are still alive when it becomes public domain, dabble in creating themselves. The public domain is a double-edged sword, and it's hard to be entirely pessimistic about it. The only vulnerability it has is when it comes to agents of greed lobbying to bring an end to it or circumvent it for as long as possible. Disney, for the longest time, has found loopholes alongside their legal lobbying against the public domain. This concerns the easily forgotten difference between copyright and trademark. Copyright protects the intellectual property created by a single entity from being outright copied and redistributed for commerce. Trademark is different. It is a constant and necessary attribute even among myriad creators making art and media in the same public domain IP. Generally speaking, trademark prevents a creator's audience being pulled away from their work and instead towards someone else's, because it shared a signature, iconic image or motif. It is the insurance that when people see or hear a mark of your trade, they will associate it with the rest of your catalogue, since anything to cause confusion to the contrary is legally dissolved and punished with litigation. Despite the public domain, Disney still trademarked specific attributes of their mascots, characters, and worlds, similar to how for a time portraying Sherlock Holmes as warm was still restricted by copyright. Dressing Mickey Mouse in certain clothing remained under Disney's trademark. Going even further, they exploited this system by having a scene from Steamboat Willie being an intro to one of their studios, meaning if the creators used their iconography, they were infringing on trademark of their introductory logo. Within the confines of characters and worlds whose origins are found in Disney, but are out of their control due to public domain, creators producing projects using the IPs after the fact can sue each other for trademark infringement. Specific character designs for Pinocchio are not just protected by Disney, for instance. The developers of the video game Lies of P and the filmmakers of the new horror film interpretation Pinocchio Unstrung would be in litigation with each other if they infringed on one another's trademark, and Disney would not have a stake, investment, or rights to engage. Adaptations such as these seem to purposefully stray far away from Disney's aesthetic tone and storytelling atmosphere, some more inspired than others. Low-effort horror films of initially family-friendly franchises are becoming a plague in the entertainment industry. Virally, it began with Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. The absurdity of the premise of this film made headlines, yet so too did its box office returns. Horror films, with their low budget yet track record for high yield, renders it inevitable that the public domain causes a cascade of perhaps not always low effort but absolutely cynical and often crass marvins of cultural icons. Although the inevitability of this trend and its proven history of levelling out and stabilising should allow us to calibrate our cynicism, it is natural for characters to change, to evolve or devolve depending on one's preference. The freedom and potential, the meritocratic availability of the public domain makes it so if one group does not like how a character is treated, there can easily be others to appreciate made by different creators. This cannot be done when an intellectual property housing beloved characters and worlds is trapped in the shackles of one singular entity. Subsequently, freedom of reimagining pre-established mythology seems promising for the future. Even from the conception of some IPs, the internet urban legend creepypastas turned complex, community-driven mythologies and fictional universes are such that they never need to enter the public domain. They are what's called Creative Commons. This means that so long as they differ in depiction to a sufficient degree, the release of A24's Backrooms in cinemas does not stifle the freedom for anyone to produce a project in that universe. Akin to the underdog low-budget nature of this pursuit, the result for now might lean heavily towards horror films, but this is promising nonetheless. However, I'm afraid we must calibrate our enthusiasm, because most of this output will be low-effort sludge, especially in this age of AI. The aggressive protection of corporate trademarks are a necessary evil. Despite what may be apparent, corporate trademarks are a crucial preventative measure to prevent disasters. Coyness on behalf of trademark holders results in fiascos akin to the viral Willie's Chocolate Experience event held in Glasgow, which used attractive and fake AI-generated graphics in their marketing to draw dozens of families with children to what turned out to be an embarrassing, shoddy scam event in an abandoned industrial warehouse with below the bare minimum of design or facilities. This event was very low profile, which became an online sensation after the fact for how appalling it was, but many more of these might happen which do not go viral, and we do not hear about. If companies do not make clear and define their trademarks and actually enforce as a deterrent to these cultural offences. Once an IP goes to the public domain, though, it is up only to the fans, the customers, the audience, to be able to discern integrity and quality. Art of merit and effort will rise to the surface, yet, within reason, it is for us to seek it out and meet them halfway. The public domain relies even more on a robust and genuine relationship between the creator and consumer, the filmmaker and its audience. A creator leveraging mythology in the public domain should trust the audience has the ability to meet them halfway and immerse into a world which is not our own.